Hey there, curious minds. Welcome to this intellectual journey. Have you ever wondered if a poem could build an empire? Sounds wild, right? Well, today we're going to uncover how words were Rome's most powerful secret weapon, sharper than any legionary's sword and more enduring than any aqueduct. When we think of Rome, we picture colosseums, legions, and emperors. But what if I told you that the true battle for the empire's soul wasn't fought on the fields of Gaul, but on the poet's scrolls? Today, we'll unveil how literature was a sophisticated instrument of power, propaganda, and social control. Stick around because we're going to deconstruct how Virgil and Ovid, two titans of world literature, became key players in Emperor Augustus's political chess game. One was his greatest ally, and the other his most famous victim. It's a fascinating story with lessons that still resonate today. Before we dive in, I wanted to tell you a quick note about the visuals you're seeing. To bring this narrative to life, I've used AI tools to generate the images. So think of them as a canvas, a way to illustrate the ideas and atmosphere of what I'm telling you. They won't always be exact representations, but rather a companion for your imagination. To understand the power of these poets, we first need to travel back to a time of chaos. Rome had just emerged from decades of bloody civil wars. The Republic, with its ideals of democracy and debate, was dead. The system was broken and the people, exhausted and yearning for peace, for an order that would give them security. And from the ashes of the Republic rose a man, Octavian, who would soon be known as Augustus. He understood something fundamental. To govern, it wasn't enough to have the strongest armies. He needed something more. He needed to control the narrative, the story Romans told themselves about who they were. Augustus initiated what became known as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. But this peace came at a price. It involved the concentration of power in one man and the end of ancient republican liberties. How do you sell this new reality to the people? How do you make an authoritarian regime seem not just acceptable, but desirable and divinely ordained? This is where the genius of his strategy came into play. Augustus knew that culture was a battleground. He understood that if he could get the best artists, architects, and especially poets to work for him, he could mold the minds and hearts of an entire generation. This was called patronage, a very well-directed system of sponsorship. It wasn't just about paying them to write. It was about creating a cultural ecosystem. A circle of intellectuals and artists led by his friend Gaius Maecenas, who shared a vision. The vision of a glorious, eternal Rome, reborn under Augustus's leadership. It was an incredibly subtle and effective propaganda machine. The objective was simple, yet ambitious, to create a new mythology for Rome. The old republic was dead. They needed an origin story for the new empire, a story that would connect Augustus and his new era directly with the gods and a manifest destiny to rule the world. A truly titanic task. And for the most important task of all, writing the foundational epic poem for this new Rome, Augustus and Maecenas chose one man, a talented, perfectionist, and deeply patriotic poet named Publius Vergilius Maro. We simply know him as Virgil, a man who would change the course of literary history. Virgil wasn't just a poet for hire. He believed in Augustus's project, seeing in it the only hope for lasting peace. So he embarked on the mission of a lifetime to write an epic that would rival Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, but be unmistakably Roman in its spirit and political message. The result was the Aeneid. Officially, it tells the story of Aeneas, a Trojan hero who, after the fall of Troy, travels to Italy to found the lineage that would eventually give rise to Rome. But unofficially, it was much more. The Aeneid is arguably the most brilliant piece of propaganda ever written, wrapped in sublime poetry. So how did this propaganda work? Firstly, the Aeneid directly linked Augustus's family, the Gains Julia, to the gods. Aeneas is the son of the goddess Venus. Therefore, Augustus, as her descendant, had a divine right to rule. It was a masterful stroke of legitimization. He was no longer just a general, he was the chosen one. Secondly, the poem redefined Roman virtues. The hero, Aeneas, isn't like Greek heroes who sought personal glory. Aeneas is a man of pietas. This Latin word is key. It doesn't mean piety in the modern sense, it means duty. Duty to the gods, to family, and above all to the homeland. A sacrifice of self for the common good. Think about that. The message was crystal clear to any Roman who read or heard the poem. The ideal citizen, like Aeneas, had to sacrifice personal desires for the greater good of Rome, personified by Augustus. It was a lesson in obedience and loyalty to the state, presented as the highest moral ideal. Simply brilliant. The poem even contains prophecies. At one point, Aeneas' father's ghost shows him, in the underworld, a procession of the souls of future great Romans. And who's at the very end, as the culmination of all history? Augustus. The Aeneid presents him as the climax of Rome's destiny, predestined from the dawn of time. The Aeneid became the quintessential school text. Generations of young Romans learned to read and to be citizens through the story of Aeneas. They internalized its values. They learned that Rome was destined to rule the world and that their duty was to serve that destiny. The poem wasn't just read, it was lived. Thus, Virgil delivered to Augustus the story he needed, a foundational myth that justified his power, unified a fractured people, and gave them a glorious purpose. It's no exaggeration to say that the Aeneid was as crucial to the construction of the empire as the legions conquering new territories. But every story has its counterpoint. If Virgil was the voice of order, duty, and empire, there was another voice in Rome singing a very different tune, a voice of love, wit, individualism, and pleasure. That was the voice of Publius Ovidius Naso, whom we simply know as Ovid. Ovid was, in many ways, Virgil's opposite. He was a poet of the city, of social life, elegance, and seduction. While Virgil wrote about the destiny of an empire, Ovid wrote about the art of flirting at the circus, or how to keep a secret affair. He was the poet of private life, not public duty. His most famous and scandalous work was the Ars Amatoria, or The Art of Love. This book wasn't a philosophical treatise on love. It was quite literally a seduction manual, a cheeky, humorous guide on how to find and keep lovers in Augustan Rome. Imagine the impact of something like that. This clashed head-on with Augustus's moral restoration program. The emperor was promoting very strict laws to encourage marriage, fidelity, and childbirth. He wanted a Rome of soldiers and family mothers, disciplined and austere. And suddenly, the city's most popular poet was publishing a manual on adultery. Ovid's poetry represented everything Augustus was trying to suppress: individualism over community, pleasure over duty, private life over public. Ovid wasn't a political revolutionary in the sense that he wasn't calling for the emperor's overthrow. His subversion was far more subtle and therefore more dangerous. He undermined the regime's moral authority. While official propaganda spoke of piety and sacrifice, Ovid showed a Rome that just wanted to have fun, to love, and to live life. He was creating a counter-narrative, an alternative version of what it meant to be Roman. And people, especially the youth and the elite, adored him. For a time, the emperor and the poet coexisted in an uneasy truce. Ovid was too popular to be ignored, and Augustus perhaps too secure in his power. But that truce was destined to break in the most dramatic way possible. Something was about to happen that would change Ovid's life forever. In 8 AD, Augustus made his move. Without trial, without the right to defend himself, Ovid was exiled by imperial decree to the most remote and desolate corner of the empire, Tomis, a port city on the Black Sea in modern-day Romania. For a man like Ovid, a lover of Rome's sophistication, it was a living death sentence. But why? What was the crime? Ovid himself gives us the answer in his exile poems, the Tristia. He says he was punished for carmen et error, meaning a poem and a mistake error. The poem was, without a doubt, The Art of Love, which Augustus used as public justification for his condemnation, accusing him of corrupting the youth. But the poem was just an excuse. The real reason was the error. Ovid says he saw something he shouldn't have seen. Historians have debated for centuries what that could have been. The most accepted theory is that he became involved, perhaps unintentionally, in a sexual scandal affecting the emperor's own family, possibly his granddaughter Julia. Imagine the situation. Ovid, the author of Rome's most famous manual on adultery, becomes a witness to adultery at the very top of power. Adultery that made Augustus's entire moral campaign look hypocritical. The poet had become a first-order political problem. He knew too much. Ovid's exile is a brutal lesson about the limits of artistic freedom under an authoritarian regime. It showed that no matter how famous or beloved you were, if your art or your knowledge challenged the official narrative of power, you would be silenced. The empire that Virgil helped build with his pen now used its power to break another's pen. From exile, Ovid wrote heartbreaking poems pleading for a pardon that would never come. He died in Tomis, far from the city he loved and which had been the center of his poetic universe. His fate serves as a perpetual reminder of the clash between art and power, a tension that remains relevant to this day. So what does this story of two poets teach us? It shows us that literature is never just entertainment. It's always embedded in a context of power. It can be a tool to reinforce the status quo, to give a veneer of glory to a regime, as in Virgil's case. Or it can be a space of resistance. Art can be a way to question, to satirize, to offer alternative visions of life that undermine official narratives. Ovid's case teaches us that even poetry about love can be profoundly political because it defends a space of personal freedom against the demands of the state. Imitation and innovation are key here. Virgil imitated Homer to innovate, creating a national epic with a clear political purpose. Ovid took existing poetic genres and innovated them, filling them with a personal, ironic, and modern voice that defied expectations. Both use the past to speak to their present. In the end, the literature of Augustus's empire leaves us with a complex legacy. On one hand, masterpieces like the Aeneid have shaped Western culture for 2 millennia. On the other, the shadow of Ovid's exile warns us about the dangers of censorship and the intolerance of absolute power. It's a story that has repeated itself over and over. Artists who serve power and artists who challenge it. From troubadours in medieval courts to Hollywood filmmakers or novelists in totalitarian regimes, the question of the artist's role in society remains the same. So the next time you read a classic, watch a movie, or listen to a song, ask yourself, what narrative is it building? Whose interest does it serve? What power is it reinforcing, or perhaps what power is it daring to challenge? Because as Rome taught us, the stories we tell are the battleground for our soul. Roman literature, with its light and shadows, shows us that words carry immense weight. They can legitimize an emperor, define a nation's identity, or condemn a man to exile. Never underestimate the power of a good verse. It can be more revolutionary than you imagine. In summary, Augustus needed to consolidate a power that had emerged from civil war. Legions weren't enough. He needed divine justification, an epic narrative that placed him at the center of Rome's destiny. He needed hearts and minds to follow his swords, and for that he needed the poets. Virgil accepted the challenge, not as a mere propagandist, but as a true believer. He saw in Augustus's order the only way out of chaos. His Aeneid, then, isn't just a commission. It's the work of a man convinced he was helping to build a better, more peaceful, and ordered world, even if it meant sacrificing ancient liberties. The poem is a mirror of the values Augustus wanted to impose. The protagonist, Aeneas, abandons the woman he loves, Queen Dido, to fulfill his mission. The message is clear: duty comes before personal love, state interests over individual happiness, a fundamental idea for the imperial mindset that was being forged. On the other hand, Ovid represented the legacy of the Republic that refused to die, a culture of individualism, debate, wit, and a private life free from state surveillance. His poetry wasn't frontal opposition, but a celebration of everything the new regime considered frivolous or dangerous. The Art of Love was the straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't just an immoral book in the emperor's eyes, it was an act of cultural defiance. It taught young people to seek their own happiness on the fringes of Augustus's strict social rules. It was a manual for living an unofficial life, parallel to the propaganda. The error that condemned him, that secret Ovid saw, was likely the perfect excuse. Augustus couldn't simply say he was exiling Rome's most brilliant poet for his lifestyle or ideas. He needed a concrete crime, a betrayal. The connection to his granddaughter's scandal gave him the justification he needed to eliminate an inconvenient voice. It's fascinating to consider the legacy of both. The Aeneid became the model of national epic for countless kingdoms and empires throughout history who sought their own Virgil to sing their glories. The poet, in service of the state, is an archetype that was born here with unusual force. Meanwhile, Ovid became the archetype of the exiled artist, the genius misunderstood by power. His figure inspired countless writers and poets who felt marginalized or persecuted. He became a symbol of artistic integrity in the face of tyranny and censorship, a voice for the voiceless. The imitation of Greek models was Rome's starting point, but not its end. Romans didn't just copy, they absorbed and transformed. Virgil took Homer and turned him into something new, a poem with a Roman political agenda. Ovid took Greek love elegy and filled it with a purely Latin irony and psychology. This tension between imitation and innovation is the driving force behind much of human creativity. We look to the past, learn from the masters, but to remain relevant, we must add our own voice, our own perspective, adapting old forms to speak of our new realities. Rome was a master of this art of adaptation. We could say that Augustus was the first great content producer in history. He understood the importance of branding, of storytelling, a very modern word for telling stories. He wanted the Rome brand to be associated with piety, destiny, and peace, and he used the best creators of his time to achieve it. The voice of the Republic that survives in these poets is, paradoxically, a voice that reflects on its own loss. In Virgil, you feel the nostalgia for a rural, simple Italy that civil war destroyed. In Ovid, there's a celebration of individual freedom that Augustus's principate was increasingly curtailing. Literature, even when serving power, often lets these cracks of melancholy or irony slip through. Great artists, no matter how controlled they are rarely one-dimensional. In the Aeneid, for example, there are moments of deep sadness and doubt in the hero Aeneas that complicate a purely propagandistic reading. These complexities are what make these works remain fascinating. They're not mere pamphlets. They are incredibly rich human creations, born from a historical moment of brutal intensity. A moment when the future of the known world was being decided, and poets were at the center of that decision. Rome's power didn't just lie in its aqueducts or roads, but in its ability to export an idea of itself. And that idea was built with words, with verses, with myths. The Aeneid was, in a way, the cultural software that ran on the hardware of the legions and Roman administration, unifying a diverse empire. While Ovid's Defiance reminds us that the human spirit will always seek spaces for personal expression, for play, for love, and for beauty's sake, even in the most closely watched empires, literature can be the refuge of our innermost humanity. The story of Rome and its poets isn't just a history lesson, it's a mirror. It forces us to look at our own culture and ask what myths we are building today. Who are our Virgils singing the glories of the system? And perhaps more importantly, who are our Ovids and what price do they pay for their voice? Virgil, by the way, died before he could give the Aeneid its final revision. On his deathbed, he asked for the manuscript to be burned. He wasn't satisfied believing it wasn't perfect. It was Emperor Augustus himself who intervened and ordered it published. He couldn't allow his most powerful weapon to be lost. This detail is crucial. It shows the extent to which the work no longer belonged to the poet, but to the state. It had become an imperial asset too valuable to depend on its creator's will. The Aeneid was born as art, but was immortalized as a pillar of Roman power. A complex destiny for a poem. On the other hand, Ovid's masterpiece, the Metamorphoses, a brilliant and sometimes dark retelling of Greek and Roman myths, survives as a testament to the pure joy of storytelling. It's a universe of constant transformations where nothing is fixed, an idea that in itself is an antidote to the rigidity of imperial power. Thus, the two souls of Rome reach us through its literature. The soul of empire, of order, destiny, and duty, embodied in Virgil, and the soul of the individual of freedom, love, and wit, embodied in Ovid. Both are Roman, and both are ultimately human. Power has always sought to control the narrative. From pharaohs inscribing their deeds in stone to modern governments with their communications teams, Augustus's strategy was simply one of the most sophisticated and successful versions of this eternal aspiration, to create reality through words. And literature, in turn, has always been a space of negotiation with that power, sometimes collaborating, sometimes resisting, sometimes simply ignoring it to explore the truths of the human condition. This dynamic duo, Virgil and Ovid, personify that eternal dilemma of the creator facing authority. The study of classical literature isn't a dusty academic exercise. It's a window into the mechanics of power, the construction of social identity, and the big questions about our place in the world. The answers the Romans gave to these questions through their poetry still challenge us today. Let's consider the concept of mos maiorum, the customs of the ancestors, which was central to the Roman mentality. Augustus presented himself as the restorer of these ancient virtues. The Aeneid was the perfect tool to remind people what those virtues were, conveniently redefined to support his regime. Ovid, on the other hand, scoffed at that solemnity. His poetic world is full of gods, behaving whimsically and very humanly, chasing nymphs and deceiving their wives. It was a way to demystify the official state religion, which Augustus was trying to revive as a pillar of his moral authority. The voice of the Republic was a polyphonic voice, that is, many voices. There was debate, dissent, factions. The empire aspired to a single voice, that of the emperor, reflected in a unified culture. The literature of the era is the battleground where that old republican polyphony fought not to be extinguished by the new imperial monophony. The genius of Augustan propaganda was that it didn't seem like propaganda. It was wrapped in art of the highest quality. It wasn't a crude pamphlet, it was the Aeneid. This made it far more persuasive. People embraced it for its beauty, and in doing so, absorbed the political message without even realizing it. In contrast, Ovid's honesty was his undoing. He didn't hide his disinterest in politics and his love for life's pleasures. His work is a transparent reflection of his values, and that transparency clashed with the opacity and hypocrisy of the power Augustus had to employ to maintain his image. Virgil built a bridge between the mythical past of Troy and Augustus's imperial present, giving the latter the solidity and inevitability of legend. Every Roman could feel part of a grandiose story, a 1,000-year journey culminating in the peace and glory of their time. Ovid, on the other hand, built mirrors. Mirrors where Romans of his time could see their own lives, their loves, their vanities, and their desires reflected. He didn't offer them a destiny, but a present. And for a regime that demanded sacrifices for the future, celebrating the present was an act of rebellion. The imitation of Greek form, the epic but innovation in content, giving it a Roman political purpose, was Virgil's formula for success. He showed that originality doesn't always consist of creating from nothing, but in reinterpreting tradition in a powerful and relevant way for the current moment. Ovid's exile also marked a turning point. He created a new literary genre, exile poetry, where nostalgia, loneliness, and reflection on one's own identity became central themes. His personal suffering transformed ironically into his last great artistic innovation. In the end, both poets were instruments, whether they wanted to be or not. Virgil was a conscious and willing instrument in the construction of a new Rome. Ovid was an unwitting instrument, an example Augustus used to demonstrate the limits of imperial power and the consequences of crossing the line. The Roman Republic, in its final days, was a hotbed of strong and conflicting voices. Cicero, Catullus, Lucretius, all of them wrote with a freedom and passion that reflected the chaos and energy of their time. Augustus's piece, though welcome, inevitably involved a certain taming of that literary energy. We can see Augustan literature as the soundtrack to a new era. Virgil composed the national anthem, solemn and grand. Horace, another poet in the circle, composed odes celebrating peace and moderation. Ovid, with his playful rhythm and melodies of love, was the pop music the regime couldn't control. Imperial power needed heroes and role models. Aeneas was the model for the citizen. Augustus, the model for the ruler. Literature was the instruction manual. It taught people how to think, what to value, and whom to admire. It was a cultural re-education on a massive scale. The legacy of this cultural manipulation is immense. The idea that a nation needs a grand story, a unifying myth, is something that has influenced Western politics to this day. The search for the great American novel or political speeches that appeal to a national destiny draw directly from the wellspring of Augustus and Virgil. Likewise, the figure of the artist as society's critical conscience, as the voice that says no to power, that defends individual freedom, finds in Ovid one of its first and most tragic martyrs. His story is a warning that resonates in every debate about freedom of expression. So when we think of Rome's literature, we don't just see poems. We see the blueprint of an empire. We see the conflict between collective duty and individual desire. We see the birth of archetypes that still define our relationship with art and power today. Ultimately, we see the reflection of our own struggles. Imitation, innovation, and power are not three separate themes in Roman literature. They are a single braid, an inseparable knot that shows us how culture is created, controlled, and resisted. The story of Virgil and Ovid isn't just about Rome. It's about the eternal and fascinating battle for the human soul. And that's the incredible story of how the pen was as important as the sword in forging the Roman Empire. Literature not as an adornment, but as a fundamental tool of power, a weapon to construct reality. A lesson that future empires would never forget. I hope this journey through the verses and power of Rome has been as fascinating for you as it was for me. History is full of these secrets, these hidden connections that, once revealed, completely change our perception of the past and, of course, our present. We've seen how Virgil became the voice of the empire, endowing Augustus with divine legitimacy through the Aeneid. His work was the ideological software that helped unify and give meaning to the new Roman order, presenting duty to the state as the highest virtue. And we've seen the other side of the coin with Ovid, the poet of love, irony, and individual freedom, whose art clashed head-on with the emperor's moral agenda. His exile serves as a stark reminder of the dangers art faces when it challenges absolute power. This duality, literature as a pillar of the state and literature as a refuge for the individual, is perhaps the most important legacy of this golden and terrible era of Roman poetry. A tension that, as we've seen, remains alive in every society and every form of artistic expression. The next time you encounter a work of art that moves you or makes you think, remember this story. Ask yourself about the context in which it was created, because every poem, every book, every song is a piece in the grand chess game of history and culture. It's a reminder that the humanities, the study of literature, art, and history, are not a luxury. They are an essential tool for understanding the world, for decoding the messages we receive daily, and for being more conscious and critical citizens. Thank you so much for joining me in this analysis. It's been a true pleasure to explore these ideas with all of you and dive into the complexity of ancient Rome. Your curiosity is what makes this space possible, and I thank you for it wholeheartedly. Now I'd love to know what you think. Do you think literature or cinema are still used as a weapon of power so effectively today? Which contemporary artist do you think best embodies Ovid's spirit, challenging dominant narratives? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and want more hidden secrets from history and literature, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Your support is crucial for me to keep creating content like this. I'll see you on the next intellectual journey.